Artwork, critiques, Photoshop files, and reference sheets are all available on my Patreon. Well, hello there guys and girls, my name's Mikey, welcome back to my room. It's time for another tutorial. And today we're going to take a look at the basic shapes that can make building up the bodies or torsos of your anime and manga characters nice and easy. But seeing as we have recently been looking at curvier character designs, we're going to focus on some thick thighs with our torsos today, and also as we've done some simple building block shapes before in a similar manner, today we're going to be talking about keeping things a bit more dynamic, mapping the surface of our bodies in separate areas just so that this can help you understand what's going on for your future drawing designs, get into a little bit more detail, and also about the overall guiding shapes that can kind of just help the language and the overall form that you end up with your lady characters. So if you want to follow along at home, grab yourself a few sheets of paper, lay them on the desk so it's a little bit softer than just one sheet of paper on a hard surface. I'm using a super cheap disposable mechanical pencil. It's just like a 2B. Guys, you don't need the best equipment to get practicing. Just grab whatever you've got to hand. We will crack on, and anything that we draw today I'm going to put into my character reference sheet or the tutorials workpack, which you can grab the entire set for just $1 on Patreon. Links of course below. But guys, before we get cracking, would you believe we have a sponsor for today's video? So let me tell you all about
Raid Shadow Legends!
Now this bad boy free-to-play RPG has stunning graphics with sweet character designs, somewhere between the rugged looks of fantasy TV shows and the more fantastical lore with exquisite monsters and some rather lovely elf ladies. So click the link in the description below so that you can build up squads from Raid's 16 factions. There's the good ones like Bannerlords, the monsters like Orcs, the corrupted like Knights Revenant, and the Union with dwarves. So challenge yourself to the edge in the ongoing tournaments, competing against the entire raid community around the globe, whilst fighting in the Spider's Den, Ice Golem's Peak, the almighty Fire Knight, or the notorious Dragon, in order to win some awesome rewards and rare artifacts. And if you're quick enough today, you can join my clan and carry me. The nickname's mikeymegamega. And remember, it's free to play, available on PC and mobile, and even my ancient Samsung Note 2 can handle this thing despite the lush graphics. Or just playing it on the tablet when I want to chill out between art sessions. Now, I'm currently vibing with the High Elves. I'm just classy like that, including this rare champion Elhain, who has long-range bow skills, lots of critical damage, the ancient Avarian heritage of the Shimmering City, and a lush tight design with okay, never mind. So what are you waiting for? Not to mention that if you click the link in the description below to sign up, you will receive a bonus 200,000 silver and a free bonus champion straight off the bat. The rare Grinner from the Undead Hordes who can give a 50% buff to your allies' attacks. And he's just so handsome. So grab all of that from the top here once you're in, and this is available for new players for the next 30 days. And thank you, Raid Shadow Legends. So yeah guys, seeing as YouTube loves to demonetize my content anyway, from time to time you might see the odd sponsor slot. Why not click that link? It would really help out the channel. However, let's get cracking. So what I'm going to do is just use a scrap of spare paper here. This is to rest my hand on so that I don't smush up the actual paper itself with any natural oils and greases that come off of your hand. And over here, when it comes to the torsos and form of my characters, I like to start with an overall guiding line, which is kind of the weight or flow from around about the neck down to around about the bum. We're going to give this some curve. You'll notice my hand is very far up the pencil because I'm not doing any fine details. I'm going with some overall gesture line here, and this can vaguely represent the overall spine or through line of a character. And then what I like to do is come across with a shoulder line to give myself an idea of where the shoulders are going to be going end to end. That tells me all about the overall form of the torso and how it drops down. And then I have another line further down here, and this is going to be all about where the hips are going. So I'm keeping this very light at the moment, but we're going to just firm up a little bit so that it's nice and clear for you guys at home. And what I'm going to do is just use a couple of basic shapes to bring this all together for the body, and then we're going to start to join everything up with details. So the first one, which is going to be taking up a little bit more than half of this space in between these two areas, is the rib cage mass. And for me, that's mostly just a very loose egg shape that drops down somewhere around about here. Again, I'm being very, very loose at the moment. We're going to firm up in a minute, something like so. And then a much flatter one that's going to be right across to these hips. So this is much more of a squashed circle, elliptical shape that's going on here. Also down there, even flatter on the underside of the line. These two shapes are pretty much almost touching each other, just like that. And that is in essence the main part of our body. Now we're just going to work out what's going on. So with this kind of topmost chest shape, what I generally like to do firstly is understand where the front surface line of this is going to be. And for that, it might just be a case of running down the front middle here, going down to about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down there, stopping and actually imagining that there's a bit of a flat surface area right here. This is your breastbone area where all of your ribs come up and meet. And then I cut outwards and down, another arc shape coming off side to side, and it's a little bit foreshortened as we curve around there. And that roughly is our rib cage that we're going to be bringing things down from. And then when it comes to this other elliptical shape that we've got going down here, I'm actually going to imagine that I flattened off the top, that the top of this is leaning slightly towards us. So here's the front surface of this shape here, and then we've got the side there and going off there, just for the sake of imagining what's happening. And at the front part, not too wide, I like to just cut out a U shape, just like that. And this is a very rough way to kind of shape up the front of the hip structure in the bones. And what it allows us to do is go back up here to our rib cage shape, and I'm not going to go quite to the lowest point. I'm going to go just inside about here and about here. And I can imagine that the main abdominal wall, the main tummy area, is going to be a line that comes down here and just joins up there for rib. I'm going to give it a little bit of curve to match this curving flow line here, and just comes down there. Now, what's interesting with the female form is that it's not always this big flat wall, but maybe something where we can just shape this up a little bit more here, like so. But also, I'm going to bring it down and in before I then come out again here. So as I come down this line here, I'm actually just sweeping in. I'm making that even thinner. Then I'm sweeping back out again, so that we have this kind of circular shape and then this big rising upper and round shape. What I'm going to do, this is just for clarity for you guys, is just slightly erase that bottom part there, just so that we can see the part that we're focusing on up and around here. And then the next step I like to do is all about mapping the surfaces, understanding what these curves are physically doing. I'm going to follow this line down the front of our chest, down the middle, and I'm going to take it down over the abdominal wall, sweeping in a little bit as we go just under the ribs before it goes down, and then maybe comes out just a slight bit of curve as it goes over the bottom part of the tummy, just like that there. And then we've just got a few bits that I might pop back to the top and start to build up. So if this is our character up here, it might have a neck that's going to be up and around here. So I'm going to just try to make this relatively dark. It might not be perfect. As ever, I want to show you what's going on as quickly as possible without getting too locked in. And I'm going to just come down to a V, just like this, to that center line, and imagine a circle here, and that's going to be where our collarbones and bits are meeting up. Now, I might just have a bit of the back of the neck coming up here for the, I think, the traps. And then I'm going to think up some circular shapes, very loose and very light, that sit along this shoulder line and hang just off it. One there, one on the other side of the chest there. Now we're starting to build up that form. Now our collarbones come from the top of these circles. Down here they kind of sweep in and don't quite touch, just on either side of our kind of guide circle there, and up on that edge as well, like so. And when it comes to the shoulders of our characters, we can think in terms of these circular curves, but also I might just wedge it out a little bit to be our shoulder. So if I'm going to have an arm that just goes off and down here, we'll stop very abruptly with our limbs. I'm actually going to give this a bit more mass by thinking that this shape wedges up here and then wedges a bit down there to a point. And that point is just going to come and meet back towards the bottom part of our circle here. And you can imagine then that we've got a cylinder shape just going off of here, which is going to be the main form and mass of one arm. So the bicep itself, the top part is actually just sweeping and meeting right down in there, like so. And then we've got these areas around the back where we've got the shoulder blades and the lats meeting up with the traps and so on, where there's going to be the back muscles sweeping a bit further in here as well. So let's go and look at this over the other side. Let's have this arm going a bit more directly out, like so. We can start off with the cylinder, if you prefer, coming out from that circle joint, but we're still going to need then to build the shoulder on top of it, the muscle that's pulling this up. And so again, I'm just going to start about here. I'm going to sweep up like so, and just bring things down and around over the front. This is obviously a very well-built lady over the shoulder. She's lifting, that's for sure. And then sweeping back towards us, towards the bottom part of that circle. And the way that both of these shoulders tend to meet into the chest is they're curving over this surface here and then hitting a slightly flatter cross surface here. So it never hurts to put a bit of an indicating line here where it's meeting in and here, just like so. And then where we're going to have the boobs dropping off is going to be below our shoulder circles. So curving ever so slightly because we're going over the surface of the chest. I might have another guideline that goes down about here. But we're not going to focus too much on the boobs here today. We've got plenty of other tutorials where we cover that. Let's go back up just to this neck area and just create another V line that sweeps up and out like so. And that just indicates some of the neck muscles. But again, we'll dive into the details a little bit later when we focus on the neck and shoulders specifically. We'll be building up all sorts of tutorials, guys. So if we've got some shapes that are starting to work out in the top here, and we're coming down to the form here, what on earth are we actually going to be doing about all of this in here? Well, what I quite like is a very quick guiding line. Now, I imagine this in my head, but what you can imagine is a triangle that's pointing right down this ribcage shape, pointing right down into the middle of that ellipse there, and then another line that comes on the outside and sweeps back in like so. So that the thinnest middle part is below the overall center of the torso, just there and there, and we can start to build some shapes that very loosely follow that as a guide. Now, I like to come up from the hips because this area of the hips is a relatively solid part of the body that doesn't squish or move around. There's a lot of bone going on. So we might come up here and then wedge ourselves in like so, just there, and a little bit more foreshortened, but a similar thing on the far side here, where it's just wedging into that shape like so. And then there's going to be a line that just comes down here, sweeping down right towards the bottom part, right towards the genitalia at the bottom here, the privates, where we're going to have things a little bit more flattened off, and there'll just be a slightly separate gap there, which becomes our thigh gap in the end, down in the bottom. And you can imagine this line sweeping all the way back up here. And this now also defines that change in angle where the hips are swinging in, meeting up with everything, but then the lateral muscles are coming in as well, right down to meet the side of the abdominal wall. So let's go in here and then bring ourselves back up that edge. And then with this part of the rib cage, you end up with this slight notch that you can sometimes notice. Now, often if there's boobs on your characters, it all gets hidden anyway. But you can come down this front angle and just hit this edge that comes back in and notches, visually at least, into kind of the other swing of the ribs coming down and starting to tuck in the lower floating ribs happening right down the edges here. So we've got some lines where we get to sweep back in down there, follow the abdominal wall here. We can't quite see the lats happening on this side, maybe just a bump there, you never really know. Not quite in this instance, because we're going to come right down to the hip, around that hip line there. Let's go up here, and if we follow this line around here, as we get to the boobs, this shoulder line that comes in and creases near the armpit, you can imagine that continuing a little bit down the front of the body. So now all of this is side And we're just having a quick look at these lines down the front, because that's going to help us hang the boobs in just a moment. But when we go back to the hip area down here, we've got how things come up at this edge, but now we just need to think about what's happening with how it connects to the thighs down here. So I like to think of our legs coming out the center part of each side. So if you imagine this side is kind of a leg area, this is a bit of a leg area, we might have just one that's coming down here and one that's raised and a bit more towards us, like so, ever so slightly coming down. And what we can do is just follow this curve around here, sweep out and down to create some mass. I'm going to go nice and wide near the top of this leg trunk area before I just really start to sweep that curve in. So it's curving quite hard at the top as we go down. I'm just going to cut that off visually a little bit there. And then we can just sweep up, imagining that these are cylinder shapes as we come up here and just tuck in a little bit to create that thigh gap down there. And you don't need to put too much details in these areas if you don't want to, but it's never really hurts to remember that your main kind of hip flexors are up here, and you have this big kind of trunk of muscle over the front part of your leg that comes down and sweeps in at this angle to cover everything at the front. So if you imagine that the shape of the hips and body is meeting here and up like so, so all of our leg mass stops about there, but you still have maybe just this line of muscle that's describing stuff happening on the inside edge, and you've got a separate zone just there like so. Everything else sweeping up round the side. So let's just have this leg a little bit further up and coming a bit more towards us, and we'll just describe this shape a little bit more differently. So I'm just going to very loosely get a cylinder shape that's coming a bit more towards us as a viewer, down this hip, again, thinking about how we sweep out on this shape here. So let's come out nicely like that towards us, but let's start to just do something like this to flatten it all off. And here I'm going to come out from this point around about here and bring that around to be the muscles that's going to be over the top. And then just under here, I've still got that separate zone, but I'm just going to sweep in like so. So let's just take the edge off there. That's just as a guiding cylinder. And then we've got the top of the muscles coming over the top part of the leg here. So let's bring all of this round and up in front of us, in front of our hip, and coming around maybe just a bit there, separately defined, before we sweep back down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the very tricky and good once you've got it covered, but a pain if you haven't, the knees and how the legs work around the knees and the knee joints at different angles. We'll be taking a look at all of that separately in the future as well. So there we've got the most of it. We've got our flat front area for most of our hips, making their way up before all of a sudden everything goes into the sides. We've got our abdominal zones as we sweep round. We've got a rough idea of how it comes in, tucks under almost. This area almost in shadows, we just go under before we start to sweep out, the belly button around about here. And then when it comes to kind of hanging the boob shapes, what I like to imagine is that we start here, the very back of your neck, the back of the spine, and we just draw down and through each area. If you imagine roughly a line that just again goes over the surface of the chest, and the main mass is starting underneath this line that crosses underneath the shoulders. So we're just kind of sweeping out a bit here. Now I'm keeping everything as proportioned as possible this time, just so that we can focus and not lose attention from the actual torso shapes underneath. And then because the boob is going to be against the surface of the chest, not creating these perfect circles, but these hanging teardrop shapes, tears of joy, obviously, they're boobs, that are just going to kind of fall away from here. And they're going to meet against these lines that I said were coming off the shoulder and then up and around like so. So let's sweep around here. Just like that. Our lines that define things are happening around the bottom, but not so much over the top. And then, excuse me there, that's just a bit of fabric I've got to keep the microphone going. And then just a bit down here where we sweep off there. And so you can imagine the surface that's happening here is just curving around like so before it goes a little bit flatter up the chest, down here, but then over that surface shape like so as well. So it's very rough, but hopefully this is going to be giving you a bit of an idea what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and draw this a couple more times in some slightly different poses, but before I drop into time lapse, I want to very quickly just talk about guiding shapes that are going to help you as well. So let's keep this nice and quick. I'm going to have a character that's also standing right about here. I'm going to have him a bit higher so I can tuck some shape just into this area. And I might have my shoulder line up here again, and my hip line might be going on here. Now I'm going to draw in the egg shapes that are going on, but to help me understand how the top might be leaning back and the hips might be leaning a bit forward towards us, like they're tipping towards us, I might actually want to just use some very loose guides like some rectangles, where I'm going to imagine that our egg shapes are going to be sitting a lot more inside these rectangular boxes, even if it's only very loosely as a guide. And then maybe the hips are going to be leaning a bit more towards us as well. Actually, it's a bit too extreme. Something like that. I'm just keeping it very loose and very rough. And then if I like what's happening here, I might just keep this big sweeping curve to then let me get nice and big and nice and thick with the thighs as well. So I've got this kind of big thigh to bum curve, but this kind of hip bucket here, and this chest bucket here, but I'm going to bring everything together. So I'm going to drop into time lapse, and hopefully these very light loose shapes that I've put here will make sense when I dive in, and I'll see you guys right at the end. Okay guys, and welcome back. Yeah, here we have it. So what I've been doing when I've been building up these forms is a few particular things. As mentioned, I had some boxes to help kind of show the underside, a very extreme sense of the chest and the forward tipping part of the hips. And each time I made a pass going around these shapes, I was coming more and more away from the guiding shapes themselves, just to kind of create a few more organic moments. So for example, if we're just kind of looking down here where we see this rib cage come in, it's sweeping round here, then we've got the lateral parts, and I can start to make that more of an organic shapely line when it might be just squeezed in a little bit, but it's going against then that harder, firmer edge over the hip. And because we're looking a bit down over this bucket shape, or at least it's tilted a bit forward towards us because the spine sweeps back and goes into the lumbar area here, it's the right kind of angle where I can follow this curve all the way around. And that was because I was using those really long sweeping guiding curve shapes to kind of help define the fact that things were going to be really thick around here and less voluptuous on top. Here I just wanted to really hit up loads of different surface lines. So I'm not particularly trying to worry about each particular muscle group and where they're sitting on this character, but in terms of the basic anatomy to help you understand the surface of your character for all the different areas. So here we've got these cylinder joint areas of the legs that are coming in, but we've got some slightly different surface curves and shapes for the different parts of the meaty muscle. The abdominal wall kind of curves round to a tiny bit of tummy that might just pop out a little bit before it flattens off down by the pelvic area. And even with the hips here, we've got this kind of hard hip pelvic front area that kind of sits flat around here before we understand that we're looking over the top and so on. And when it comes to a character in a slightly more extreme pose, this one was kind of just sliding straight off the side of the page there almost. I didn't quite judge it perfectly. But if we're kind of looking down and having a twisting form with some different angles, I'd still started off when you watch that kind of time-lapse part by sweeping across the shoulders here, going really hard with that contoured apostol, i.e. another line that's going against it and sweeping down, making it very dynamic. And then as we dropped off the chest shape, just kind of working out these forms. Okay, here's this kind of elliptical shape for the hips. We're looking down on top. I can split it in half down the middle for the bum. When you've got your kind of main meat of the butt cheeks kind of coming up round the back, you can imagine a triangle of shape here, where the lumbar region of the spine goes right down in there. Here and here is where you get a lot of the muscles meeting up against the back of the hips, the superior posterior iliac spine area, and then we've got a lot of twisting shapes that come down. So from the side of the boob, underneath the arm, we've got the side of our chest, and that's coming right down across as the lateral muscles here meet into the side of the abdominal wall at the front, and that side shape comes right down over the side of the hips, just coming out here. So here's our side part there as well, squeezing out as it goes round the side of the bum for the legs coming forward. And then obviously some boobs just kind of hanging off the front, but we've got separate boob tutorials where we worry about all of that stuff in detail as well. So my delicious friends, I hope this has been a little bit useful in basically the simple building blocks we use to build up the body shapes, but also just a few of the details that we try to think about regarding the surface area of our characters. Even if maybe with your character designs there's no details particularly sitting here, you always want to be able to imagine exactly the shapes of these surfaces and where they're going. It's going to give you a much firmer understanding of a form, help you loads with your own character designs. So don't just copy these, make sure that you're drawing lots of different chest circles and hip circles and elliptical shapes and building up characters in all sorts of different angles. But of course, if you want to grab this very sheet right here, I'm going to be adding it to my tutorials work pack as mentioned. You can grab that along with all of the other bits and my Photoshop brush set for $1 on Patreon, and that just really helps me out. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Big shout out to last month's patrons, Melissa, Brendan J, Homongchi L, Danny S, Cairo N, and Justin J. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see the rest of you next time around. Take care.